Thank you so much, Vicky, and thank you, Francesca and Frank and everybody involved in this conference. Thank you so much for letting us present our panel today. What I'm going to do today is a very brief contextualization of the program, and then I will give the floor to our foundation project. So my name is Carlotta Paltrinieri. I'm the senior researcher within Towards the National Collection, which the mission of Towards the National Collection is to enable research and development that will digitally connect the UK's outstanding heritage collections, opening them up to new research and to new audiences. And of course, the role of interfaces is key in this. Before moving on, I just want to point out that we understand that the word national can be a somewhat very loaded word, especially in the current political context. But for this program, we simply mean the breadth and range of culture and heritage collections held in the UK. So let me give you a little bit of facts about Towards the National Collection. It is a major 5-year, 18.9 million investment into the UK's museum, archives, libraries, and galleries. And funding is provided through the UKRI Strategic Priorities Fund and is delivered by the Arts and Humanities Research Council. I am part of the directorate, which is based at the Historic Environment Scotland in Edinburgh. So there are 3 phases of funding that we have funded as a program. There are 8 foundation projects, and you can, if you have your phone with you, you can scan that QR code at the top. It will take you to the website page for these projects. So we have 8 foundation projects that are running to, they're running up to 2 years. A few of them have already ended, and each of them was about £200,000 of funding. You see the names in bold are the ones that are going to present today. We have 3, so these foundation projects are all led by an independent research organization in partnership with a university. And each of these projects are, broadly speaking, reviewing the current position, developing and testing methodologies through case studies, and presenting recommendations for future practice. We've also funded 3 COVID-19 projects that provide a critical and time-sensitive evaluation of the digital practice undertaken by museums during the COVID-19 pandemic. And we're about to award 5 discovery projects. They're going to be announced soon. They're going to be big, 2.5 million, about 2.5 million each. So stay tuned if you're curious to know about them. But let me now move on to the topic of today. So in this panel, you will hear from 3 of our foundation projects: deep discoveries, locating a national collection, and engaging crowds. Each project is developing a proof of concept user interface that aims at engaging different audiences, from experts to casual users, at different levels of agency, from participatory methods to serendipitous discovery, setting an example for organizations dealing with similar digital collections and technologies. But let me introduce the speakers today. For the Deep Discoveries team, which is led by Lora Angelova, who couldn't be here with us today. It's Joe Briggs, who is Associate Professor in the School of Design at Northumbria University, and Bernard Ogden, who is Research Software Engineer at the National Archives. We'll have from Locating the National Collection, the PI Gethin Rees, who is Lead Curator of Digital Mapping at the British Library. And from the Engaging Crowds team, we have Grant Miller, who is the Project Manager and Communication Lead for the Zooniverse Citizen Science platform based at the University of Oxford. And I believe that now Bernard and Joe would like me to keep sharing my screen for them. So I'll just do that and let them go ahead.
Thank you, Carlotta. I'm Bernard Ogden, at the National Archives in the UK, and I'm speaking alongside Joe Briggs from Northumbria University School of Design. And as Carlotta said, Laura unfortunately can't be here today. So I'm going to start by just quickly introducing this project from her slides. So Deep Discoveries began in early 2020 and is wrapping up now. And it was a collaboration between 3 core partners, the National Archives, the University of Surrey, and the Victoria and Albert Museum, and several project partners. And the project teams included a user experience and interface development team assembled from TNA and the V&A, a team from Northumbria University School of Design, who joined us later in interface development, and visual search researchers at the Centre for Vision, Speech and Signal Processing at the University of Surrey. So very much a cross-disciplinary, cross-institutional project. So these are the project objectives. I'm not going to read them all out, but I'll just say the project was very much about visual search and heritage collections. So visual search here being a method to allow people to search using images rather than words. So the idea is that a user presents an image and they are shown similar images. And that's all based on direct analysis of the image itself with no metadata involved. And crucially, the computer vision and design research speaks to current discourses around explainable artificial intelligence, which became an important part of our prototype. And this is technology in which the AI's reasoning is explained to the user. So here, the reason the AI considers two images to be similar. So I'll just very quickly introduce the prototype. So the basic interface lets the user upload a picture, and then it just returns similar images from the collections, as you see here. And similar just means similar as far as the neural network is concerned. And I won't go deeper into it than that for now. So in more advanced modes, the user can engage in a dialogue with the system. That begins with this heat map generation you can see in the middle there. That gives you some idea of what the AI considers to be similar. And the user can then reflect upon that, and they can edit their search. They can add further images to the inputs or remove some images. Or on the right of the slide there, you can see that they can select parts of an image to give particular weight to, and they can proceed iteratively like this for as long as they like. So that's what we produced, but I'll talk a little about how we got there. So as I said, it was a cross-disciplinary project with members from humanities and technical backgrounds. And there's certainly potential for difficulty in crossing the gap between humanities and technical people, as I expect we're all aware. But a point of significant difficulty came when we were trying to align the user research team's ideas for an interface design with the computer vision team's ideas for a novel piece of computer vision research. So the user interface, the user research team, completely reasonably, was focused on the outcomes of user research, thinking in terms of user need and broadening access. And the computer vision team, also completely reasonably, were focused on novelty, which led to some more radical user interface ideas. I was actually a bit surprised that we ran into trouble here, because in my mind, these disciplines were both sort of broadly computing and therefore kind of close together. But I really shouldn't have been surprised, because I know from past experience that this kind of thing can happen all the time between different software engineering teams. And it is partly disciplinary, but it's not just that. It's also about the different drivers, the different priorities and pressures on different teams. And maybe when you have a very interdisciplinary project like this one, the differences between the closer disciplines can sort of creep up on us because we're more concerned about the more obvious gaps. I don't think it was a question of not communicating enough, because we did talk to each other a lot. It's striking that the difficulties emerged when we turned to making something concrete. So when you're just talking, there's a lot of room to leave certain things undefined or as a problem to solve later, and there's nothing wrong with that. It's an important part of exploring questions. But when we come to create something, we've got to find specific answers to specific questions to make progress. And that makes us as well think in a more concrete way, which gives us a different complementary perspective on our questions. And this was the point in the project where we asked the team at Northumbria to join us. So I shall turn over to Jo.
Okay, thanks, Bernard. So yeah, our small design team was just brought in for around an 8-week contract effectively to do the interface design. So I'll just credit my colleague Jamie Steen, who's actually from an industry background, which I think was really valuable for this, because not only we're working across disciplines, we're working across very practical applications, and then what might be called blue skies research in terms of the computer vision needs. And also we employed to do the bulk of the work of full-time recent design graduate Andy Kane. So I'll just credit them. And we adopted an agile methodology. I mean, we knew this was a challenging project that had already had challenges, but we had a very structured agile design process over these 8 weeks that we divided into roughly 2-week intensive design sprints. And then at the end of each of these design sprints, we presented what we'd made practically to the rest of the Deep Discoveries team, especially at the beginning, to test our understanding and enable us to fail quickly and kind of redesign if necessary. We later began to think about these prototypes that we created as boundary objects, and some of you will be more expert than me in boundary object theory, but it's a concept from sociology and science and technology studies concerning information such as field notes, or maps that are plastic objects generally, but used in different ways in different communities, but with enough immutability, you know, they're kind of stable and can't be changed that maintains integrity. And I borrowed that little definition there from Wikipedia. But the first sprint was about sensitizing our design team, two of whom had very little experience in this AI, this, what did the keynote say, the troubling world of AI. And I'd previously worked with the computer vision team, so I had some understanding. I was also very interested in the ethics and the challenges of working with AI. And so the explainable AI aspect of this project was my particular interest. On the right of the slide, on the left of the slide is really our standard early design process, which is about understanding users, understanding the user journey, understanding different motivations for the envisioned prototype. And prior to lockdown, this would involve kind of a paper exercise of lots of sticky notes. Obviously, we were working during lockdown and having to use things like collaborative digital whiteboards. But we were also looking at organisational goals, and that's something of the scales that's talked about in terms of boundary objects. We were having to look at multiple stakeholder perspectives and needs and try and negotiate our way through that as design researchers. The second sprint then began to focus more on interface design, initially for the smartphone, although then we went for the desktop. And we used what we call user experience wireframes. So there's lots of proprietary software that enables these kind of clickable prototypes. So that's on the right there. And wireframing is a standard industry method which just involves black and white sketches. So we're not interested in detail. We're not interested in the specific content. We're just helping to organize each screen and organize the kind of information architecture and decide what is the necessary content and functionality, for example, on a very, very basic level, what buttons you might need and where those might take you to screen by screen. Then in the latest two sprints, we looked more at advanced functionality, and we weren't sure how much of this would be implemented, but we were interested in this dialogue, as Bernard says, not only with the technology, but with the other groups, and trying to kind of understand what was possible around kind of opening up this black box, if you like, and enabling the user to prioritize particular sections. Using a colour slider and colour coding on the left. This wasn't implemented in the end. And on the right, additional functionality. It was really a real boost when we began to start using the actual collection images, but thinking about how we could create user collections. So some of this, you know, the technology is ubiquitous in sites and platforms such as Pinterest. So some of this was very familiar, especially to Andy, our young graduate, but we'd then just apply into heritage collections, and it will be familiar to some of you, I think. And then crucially looking at how these heat maps that explained the AI might be incorporated into the design. So this model of boundary objects put forward by Susan Leigh-Starr along with Griesmer in the late 80s, and then scaled up with Bowker and Starr very famously in the 90s, concerned how an object such as a road map can help someone identify a place to visit. For others, a map might represent geological sites of importance. So while maps bear some resemblance, they have differences that are dependent on use and interpretation. The boundary aspect concerns this shared space and the stuff of action. So these presentations, it was these kind of wireframes and the little animations that we made from those that were really key to this really radically interdisciplinary kind of process. And as Susan Leigh-Starr said in 2010, or published in 2010, boundary objects are a sort of arrangement that allow different groups to work together without consensus. We were designing for technology that was still being developed by Surrey. I mean, we were still deciding what platform we were using, you know, whether we were using desktop or mobile. They hadn't really fully developed some of these selection processes that they were particularly interested in developing. So we were negotiating a route through different, sometimes competing project motivations and stakeholder needs, which is very typical of design research. So having created these clickable prototypes using proprietary software, which is very typical of what we do, we then screen recorded them as these kind of immutable presentation videos. to demonstrate and test our understandings, and to kind of invite group reflection and solicit discussion across the wider team on these fortnightly presentations, and crucially then to agree next steps, because we hadn't decided on the full iteration of these sprints, because we were always negotiating what was possible and what was plausible. So the prototypes actually ended up having kind of multiple values, as intended within the design process, as boundary objects within the wider multiply motivated deep discoveries team. And then finally, we've decided to actually share these. So we've made some little kind of design process videos, which we're putting in the public domain. So this stuff wouldn't usually reach the public domain, but we thought it was a really interesting project, as much for discussion. So I'm just going to hand over to Bernard, who then actually implemented this in a working prototype.
Thanks, Jo. So I'll just go very quickly here. Yeah, during the implementation process, we didn't meet as regularly as we did during the interface design, but there were points in the development where I sought feedback, and it was still necessary to be reconciling the different views from the different teams, and the need to create a working system gave us impetus to do that. So the interface continued to drive us forwards through development. And I think I'm echoing Jo when I say that the interface has value as a site where ideas are made very concrete and clear. And as a result, it serves a communicative function and also an organizational function in giving us that impetus to the collaboration to produce the interface. So that was quite a rush through. But if you're interested in seeing the animations that the Northumbria team created to communicate with the teams, then you can look at the video linked on this slide on the left. And if you would like to, you can also try out the live prototype on the right-hand side there. But please use desktop, not mobile. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Bernard and Jo. That was great.
Okay, thanks, Carlotta. Hello, everybody. Before I start, I'd just like to thank DARIAH actually for organising this, and also for their support of the Pelagios network. Hi there to Sally Chambers. Thanks for all your help. So today I'm going to talk to you about locating a national collection, which has the somewhat pejorative acronym of LANC. The focus will be on our public engagement work. That's public engagement with various types of heritage, and how the visualization of locations in interfaces can help diverse audiences to engage in new ways with collections. So locating a national collection helps cultural heritage organizations to use location data, such as where objects were made and used, or the places they depict and describe, to connect collections and engage audiences. So through scoping, workshops, audience research, and exploratory technical work, the project will establish best practice and provide technical recommendations for a national approach to using location to discover cultural heritage collections. So the project is based at the British Library St Pancras. And on the technical side, myself and Professor Leif Isaacson from the University of Exeter are working on the application of work like the Pelagios methodology to UK cultural heritage. On the engagement side, we have co-investigators at the National Trust and Historic Royal Palaces who are working on engagement, on audience research. Now, our partners include these organizations, but also a range of others, and they divide into two basic types. So on the one hand, we have historic environment institutions. Their primary function is to manage sites. Whilst on the other hand, we have GLAMs, and their, as you know, their primary function is working with objects. And both types of organizations work with these different types of cultural heritage for the purposes of preservation, for the purposes of visitors, and for research, as well as others. Now, as you can see from the slide, our project is quite heavy on the historic environment side, whereas I myself am based at a GLAM. So that's been a really interesting contrast for us. And if we look at the UK cultural heritage sector as a whole, or rather a selection of larger institutions within the UK cultural heritage sector, that are known as independent research organizations, we see that there are many institutions that are GLAMs, but a significant number also that are historic environment institutions. Now, just to be clear, the institutions depicted here are those cultural heritage organizations that can apply for UK research funding in the same way as a UK university. Now, as we see, GLAMs predominate, but these small number of historic environment organizations are custodians of large volumes of data, and in particular, very large volumes of geospatial data. And so and hence, they're interested in the outcomes of this Locating a National Collection project. So the project aims to examine how we can build bridges between these two types of organization. And this is important, particularly as the use of location data differs considerably between the two. So on the historic environment side, as there is this very clear relationship between their collections and location, they often have a strong expertise in GIS, Geographical Information Systems. Their institutional systems are indeed founded on this geographical information, and the data they hold is often in the form of coordinates, the location data. On the other hand, GLAM organizations' metadata does contain substantial location information, but it doesn't occupy this primary role, and location data is often represented as toponyms and suffers from a lack of standardization and patchy coverage. So a key question for the project has been, how can location interfaces cross this technical divide and at the same time provide value for a range of audiences? So today we're going to look at these audiences, and the research is and our audience research aim to understand their attitudes, their confidence with digital technologies, and their values and their relationships to place and geography. The aim in gathering this information was to understand how these second phase of discovery projects that Carlotta referred to might design web interfaces based on location, such as maps or GPS-enabled apps. And in the short term, we are also going to develop a prototype interface based on that draws on these findings in order for its design. And that's going to happen now in 2022. So the research presented today, I should add, has been led by our co-investigator at the National Trust, in collaboration with Research Pods, who are a market research company, and our research curator, Valeria Vitali. So huge thanks to them. And this audience research divides into two parts. On the one hand, a quantitative survey, and second, a set of qualitative focus groups. So I'll begin with the quantitative survey. Here, 992 members of the general public from the UK completed a survey around 15 minutes in length. They are representative of the UK population on age, gender, and location, and were selected from a larger initial group as they had some interest in heritage. Some very brief headlines from this. Call me cynical, I was surprised at the level of interest in heritage. Only 8% of the group mentioned that I mentioned earlier were not at all interested in heritage. On the other hand, several pieces of information demonstrate a very high level of technical confidence. And one interesting aspect to me was that 98% have used map services before, while 65% use them weekly. My mum must be one of the 2% that have never used these before. So I am a little bit concerned that this technological competence could be a product of the fact that our survey was conducted on the web during a period of lockdown. In any case, moving on to look at the values, we wanted to gain insights into people's relationship with the idea of place. So here, 60% identified strongly with the place and local area that they now consider to be their home, whilst 54% felt well connected to the community in the location they consider to be their home. On the other hand, we found that in terms of travel, 75% agree that they enjoy a visit more if they can find out information about the history of the place that they're visiting, while 83% agree they're always curious to find out more about the places that they visit. So I find the answers here very interesting, and they demonstrate that there might be two methods of different routes into our work. On the one hand, we have a local perspective, although the majority of people identify with their local area, a very significant minority do not. And so studies have shown that much of the UK's population do feel rootless. But what does the 60% figure tell us? Does this mean that those who do not identify with their local area are uninterested in heritage? Or do we actually have an opportunity here to build a sense of local identity through cultural heritage? So on the other hand, curiosity about new places might be an even bigger motivation. So moving on from the survey, we went on to gain deeper insights by gathering qualitative data through a set of focus groups. The aim of these extended video sessions was to understand how the public connect history and location and to explore potential technologies. So how can place bring collections to life for different audiences? Now, for these focus groups, we clustered our participants based on their responses to the quantitative survey. I'll just skip over this here. I think I'm running a bit short of time, but we use technological competence and or confidence and interest in history and heritage as clustering axes. And we then presented these focus groups with what we call pretotypes. Now, these are simple sketches in the form like a few PowerPoint slides that illustrate website ideas and ask people what they would do, where they would click, and what they would expect to see. So the first pretotype we showed was called Visit Plus. This was presented as a means to enhance heritage visits to sites like castles, palaces, or prehistoric sites. Now, we left it open when people might use this, whether that was before they visited, whether it was during the visit, or possibly after the visit. And here we have the example of Lindisfarne. This presented the user with a variety of resources related to Lindisfarne. The castle here is managed by the National Trust, and the priory is managed by our partner English Heritage. And it's presented alongside GLAM objects, such as the Lindisfarne Gospels from the British Library or 3D models from the British Museum. And essentially, we created a gazetteer of heritage visitor site locations defined mainly as of national significance. And these locations, probably numbering only in the hundreds or low thousands, acted as a nexus or entry point for other types of collection items. So we were interested in how participants felt we might be able to derive value for users by aligning these objects with the sites. For example, I have visited Lindisfarne. Am I actually interested in the Gospels? And the reaction from the focus groups was, I would say, a bit mixed to this pretotype. There were some strong perceived benefits. They liked the diverse and high quality resources, and they did see potential uses to enhance destination understanding. But there was quite a lot of confusion amongst focus group participants around how they would use this, where they would use this, what the differences were between this and, say, a guidebook. And there was a real deep concern with the veracity of the information amongst our audience. Branding was a further issue, I feel, here. And as the name specified a particular usage, the platform was only associated with these place visits, where in actual fact, this gazetteer method might have broader appeal. So the second pretotype I'm going to mention is Heritage for All. This presented cultural heritage records like objects, buildings, and references with connections to specific locations. And this drew inspiration from James Morley's Street Near You interface. Now, they were taken from across UK collections. And in contrast to Visit Plus, here we have many locations, each with a single object. This is more of a typical GIS model, and users could discover items, click on their locations, and access information and links to institutional web pages. This was participants really had a very good reaction to this. They suggested that it could be used to inspire physical visits or as in response to physical visits. The research use cases were also mentioned. The passionate responses was based on audiences understanding the places that were most familiar to them in greater depth. And this tapped probably into current behavior around local exploration, which has intensified due to COVID travel restrictions, particularly at the time we held the focus groups. You know, I'm sure we're all used to and know well these walks around our local area that we do to get out of the house while we're walking from home. It'd be great to brighten those up a bit. Now, there are, whilst historic environment collections are very well suited to this use case, there are questions as to the use of geographical information in GLAM collections here. And that's something we're going to explore in the second half of our project in detail by creating these a data set of this type from GLAM collections, such as that at the British Library. So in summary, location offers opportunities to engage the public that other types of collection metadata do not. Audience requirements can drive this and influence this work. For example, the structure of data that we're connecting towards a national collection program requires a certain precision in order to realize these engagement use cases and for users to actually conduct searches that appeal. How can we, for example, present documents from the British Library that are meaningful to them, to users? And how does the location data need to be structured? And the Heritage for All suggests this needs to be at the level of the house or perhaps postcode or street, whilst a toponym, a gazetteer approach, including a town, for example, isn't precise enough to really fulfill that engagement context. And finally, a word on the term national and all the connotations that has. Our work has shown that collections traditionally defined as of local significance might be more meaningful to people than those of national significance. And I would like the second phase of projects in the programme to ask how local values and cultural heritage can add up to this national collection, particularly in a post-COVID world. So just to conclude, here are our project outputs. Thanks for your attention.
Thank you, Gethin. That was great. And you're very right that we need to keep in mind the local dimension, but also the national, because that's the name of the program, but also the international. I feel like it has a very big weight on this. So we'll keep that in mind. Grant Miller, would you like to go next and please share your screen?
Hi, everyone. I'm Grant Miller from the Zooniverse team based at the University of Oxford. I'm my official title is Project Manager and Communications Lead. I'm a recovering astrophysicist. I don't have a background in heritage data, so be kind. I'm currently working as part of the Engaging Crowds project that I'm going to talk to you about today that Zooniverse is involved in. My main colleague on that is Dr. Sam Blickhan, who some of you may well know. She's our heritage data humanities lead at the Zooniverse, but she's based in Chicago, so hopefully she's still asleep right now. Okay, so Engaging Crowds is a partnership between Zooniverse and three heritage institutions. So we've got the National Archives, the Royal Museum at Greenwich, and the Royal Botanic Gardens in Edinburgh. And the main aim, at least from a Zooniverse point of view and from a global point of view in Engaging Crowds, is to figure out how we can maybe change the model of engaging with volunteers in online citizen science or citizen research kind of with heritage data. So what is our current model? What can we change about how the volunteers are actually interacting with that data on our projects? And how can we better engage them? What can we learn from changing the interface? So I'll just give you, for those of you who don't know much about Zooniverse or have never even heard of it at all, I'll give you a quick background of the timeline of where we've come from, and that will help explain what I'm talking about in the next few slides. So we started back in 2007 with an individual project called Galaxy Zoo. which came out of the University of Oxford's Astrophysics department, which is where we're still based for our UK-based team. So that's the reason for that. We started with two guys who basically had a problem that they had too many pictures of space, too many pictures of galaxies, and they needed help to classify these galaxies by shape. It's a very easy visual pattern recognition problem, but it's only easy to get through that amount of images if you have more than 2 pairs of eyeballs. So they needed thousands of people to help out. The idea was to put the images online and ask people to classify them. So this is one of the first major successes in online citizen science, as we call it at Zooniverse. So that was Galaxy Zoo, and there was a very simple model. The idea is that you would show a picture at random from the data set to a volunteer who'd never seen that before. So my boss, Chris, who started the whole thing, used to call it the taxi rank system. So there was just kind of a random delivery approach. You would give that image completely chosen at random from the data set to someone who's not seen it before. They would classify, and then that image would also be shown to a bunch of other volunteers to look at. And then in the end, the consensus answer would be aggregated, and that would be taken as the classification for that image. In the case of Galaxy Zoo, they ask 40 different people to give an answer for each galaxy. 2 years later, the Zooniverse kind of arrived because that idea had sparked a lot of people's interest. Mostly because of its how generally it can be applied. At the same time, in astronomy and in ecology and in the humanities, researchers were having similar problems. Just large data sets that still had to be visually inspected, but there weren't enough people on the research team to do that visual inspection themselves. So in 2009, we expanded to start building other projects along this model for other research teams. Then in 2015, we made another major change in that we stopped being the people who built the projects, and we added a project builder to our platform. So we allow people to come to zooniverse.org, upload their data themselves, and create their project on the platform for free very quickly. So instead of having to bring in some funding, some grant money to build a handful of projects every year, we're now seeing people build their own projects in the platform, and we're launching 50 to 100 projects every year now, and they're across all domains. Our dominant disciplines are still astrophysics and ecology. We have biomedical sciences on there, but I'd say possibly the fastest growing area is in the humanities. And that is largely with thanks to Sam, who in 2016 joined the team to help us build out our humanities offerings, to help build heritage data projects on the platform. And along with that came a bit of a shift in thinking about, is this original model of just randomly showing images to people like we did in Galaxy Zoo the best? The reason we chose that originally was because we wanted it to be really clean, right? Really, each classification would be independent from the last. There was no way for people to collaborate or be led astray by other volunteers. It was all very discreet and siloed. And that was deliberate to try and keep that experiment clean. But something that Sam's been working on, and we've been working on since we've been looking at more and more heritage data projects, is that model that was originally built for galaxies. Is that the correct model to use when you're talking about these humanities projects? So one of the big shifts that Sam worked on when she first started was on a project called Anti-Slavery Manuscripts. She pushed to get people to volunteer in a collaborative mode rather than discreetly and siloed on their own, to see how this would engage them. And it had fantastic effects on the project. People loved it. The data coming out was not any poorer quality than the data we got out from our previous models. So that was a big success. And then in 2020, we joined the Engaging Crowds project. And the aim with this was to further break our models. So how can we break from the traditional Zooniverse model? What more can we offer to the volunteers to engage them in on these heritage data projects? So I'll just quickly show you what we've been building as part of Engaging Crowds. The first is a very simple idea. So rather than just people clicking a big get started button when they join a project and just getting whatever they are delivered randomly, people on the Engaging Crowds project, and this is a screenshot from our project with the Royal Museums Greenwich called HMS NHS. If you want to look it up on the Zooniverse, you can take part in this right now and you can play around and you can see this interface live. The first step you do when you say get started is you choose what we call a subject set, which is a group of subjects. So in this case, it's a set of logbooks. For example, you can actually choose the specific logbook you want to go in here, ordered by year. So you might be specifically interested in logs from a certain year. So here you can actually go in and choose, I want to go in and look at this set of logs. Then next, the next piece we're working on is not just to allow people what set of logbooks they look in, but maybe a specific page. So here we have the subject selection. So in Zooniverse parlance, a subject is just an image. So in this case, a page. So in this case, people can choose which page of the logbook they can actually start working on. And not just by page title, but we can add in any metadata that the research team happens to have about their pages, so that people could maybe choose certain authors, or maybe locations, or some sort of metadata that makes sense to them that they're interested in checking out, and they can actually jump straight into a logbook and then right down into the specific page they want to start working on. And then finally, to keep with this kind of idea of more rather than random delivery, that you're exploring a data set, you're exploring a logbook. Once you're in and you're classifying on a page, we deliver the images to you in page sequence. So sequential classification. Once you finish one, you go to the next page, the next actual physical page from the logbook, not just another random image. So it's pretty straightforward, but that is a big change for us. So rather than just random image delivery, you're now able to explore these data sets in a way that you might be if you were sitting in an archive somewhere. And just finally, you can actually also look at pages that have been completed. So on Zooniverse, normally we would immediately remove a page, on Galaxy Zoo. Once a galaxy has 40 classifications from 40 different volunteers, we remove it from the data set so no one else sees it again, because it's done, right? It has an answer. But in this case, people might want to see the context. They might want to see what the page before or the page after looks like for context. They might want to read for their own understanding or their own interest into those other pages that have already had enough transcriptions that they're technically finished, but we want to leave them up there for people to see them. So that's another big change. Sorry, I'm just going to take a drink. So this is a break from tradition, from the classic Zooniverse model, and there's some open questions. So how do we support, having these two models on the platform? Well, we thought perhaps naively that this would be quite a quick piece of work, but COVID and also just the expanding understanding of how much we're changing the Zooniverse model has led for the development to stretch out a little bit. It is involving a lot of trial and error. We're working with these three projects that I mentioned earlier, from the Royal Museums, from the National Archives, and from the Royal Botanic Garden in Edinburgh. And we're using each one as an iterative stage. So we're building, first of all, we've launched the Royal Museums project, HMS NHS, and it has like the first prototype of this, what we call the indexing tool that we've built. And then the next project we launch will be the National Archives project, which has a little bit more of those features included. And then finally the Royal Museums project. So we're kind of iteratively working towards building out this tool and figuring out how it should really work. And another big question is about balancing the research team's needs versus the volunteers here, because the volunteers, and the research team's needs don't always align. So the researchers want the data to be processed as fast as possible. The volunteers want a more engaging experience, and that's what we're trying to give them. But they're also intertwined, because giving volunteers a more engaging experience on a platform means they're going to get more involved, get more interested, spend more time there, and they could end up doing more work. So these aren't completely separate, but there are two different kind of challenging needs to be addressed. And there are also maybe volunteers who just don't like this way of exploring the data. It takes a bit longer, it's more detailed. Maybe you don't know what you want to choose to start on, you just want to be given something randomly. So we still have plenty of other projects on the platform that use our old model, and we're going to learn from engaging crowds what this new model looks like to volunteers if they find it engaging, and what they do and don't like about it, so that we can iterate on it for the future. And just a bit more here at the end about why we might be breaking the model like this. Why are we introducing this new model? How might it engage? How might this new interface be engaging volunteers? And I mentioned there at the top that designing for the optimization of a project, just getting through the data faster and showing people images quicker, doesn't always equal like shared goals for those volunteers. So one thing about automated subject delivery is it's faster, and asking people to choose will slow down the process. They have to choose a logbook, then they have to choose a page, and then they explore the data that way. It may be slower for them, but I think there are really possible like big engagement benefits that mean it might end up in a much more engaging experience for the volunteers. Again, as I said, keeping more people in the project. We know on Zooniverse projects that a large fraction of people, even on our other model, the random model, all projects start with this big spike in participation, and then we see a high attrition rate, and we only get a small percentage of people sticking around for days, for months, for years on the project. So perhaps by giving a more engaging experience like this, we can actually get more of that core crowd that stays along longer, and then in turn that will make the project more efficient, more engaging, and more successful. And some of the benefits to this model, as I see it, are the ability to participate based on interest. So as I said earlier, choosing like specific metadata for the pages you want to transcribe. Gethin was talking about how people are interested in it can be engaged and interested based on location. That's something I'm excited about for the Royal Museum, for the Royal Botanic Garden Edinburgh project. They have a lot of geolocation metadata for their herbaria specimens. So you can imagine people interested in stuff from their local area, or from an area that it means something to them and they're interested in. People have the ability to participate based more on skill. In our anti-slavery manuscripts project, we saw that people got used to certain authors' handwriting, and they were very good, for example, at deciphering that person's handwriting, but maybe not so much for others. But they had no way to choose that person each time. So in this case, they would be able to look through for that specific author, and they could stick on that person where they felt they had a highest skill at deciphering their handwriting. And so this model will allow people to do that. And just the ability to create their own pathways through the data set. It is open-ended. We're giving them all this choice that they didn't have before, and that may lead to a more engaging, we're hoping that will lead to a more engaging experience for the volunteers. And with that, I'll leave it for questions. And if you want to reach out to Zooniverse, you can do so at contact@zooniverse.org. Thank you very much.